Taxi drivers of Reddit, have you ever had to follow that car? Did you catch the car? What happened next? Not a cab driver, but while in Korea, me and my buddies from my unit took my wife to the airport after she came to visit. Heading back, we decided to grab cabs instead of the bus or train, and there they were, bullet cab drivers. These guys look like something out of a Bad Drifters movie and are rumored to be insert crazy professional armed escort type driver titles here. Well, there were too many of us for one cab, so we grabbed two of them. Our driver looked at me and my two buddies at got in his cab and asked if we want to beat them their bad. Why not? Okay, I've seen combat on 3 tours. I've been a smoke jumper. I've done crazy stuff. But turning what was usually about an hour's trip into 15-20 minutes of drifting through red lights sideways to merge with other traffic at 80-90 plus. Using sidewalks, and generally riding through something that only belonged in a video game was one of the most insane, adrenaline pumping things I have ever done and would probably do again. And yes, we won by about 20 seconds. Just enough time for the driver to yell at us to jump out, get on hood, all relaxed like we been here for our upvote for the last sentence. Often I'd get people hopping in and saying just follow that cab without giving any real destination. They just had too many people in their group for one taxi. That's not exciting. But one night I picked up 4 guys having a bachelor party, and one had left their phone in a taxi earlier in the day and had been tracking it using another's phone. 45 minutes of speeding all over the city. Cutting taxis off that might be the one with the phone, while 4 grown men hop out of my car in the middle of traffic and swarm the unsuspecting drivers to inquire about the missing phone. I must have scared the heck out of them. We finally found it. The meter said $60. They gave me $120. Not the most exciting story, but definitely the most fun fare I've ever had. Not a taxi driver, but a similar situation. I was taking a train to see my then girlfriend, now wife, perform in a play at her university. It was the closing night with the party and ceremonial flowers after. Then train got delayed by like 45 minutes. Something was on the tracks. Once we finally made it, I went running out of the train station, looking for any taxi. I see a taxi van. I run up, out of breath, and say, "How quickly can you get me to the university and what's the cost?" He's like, 15 minutes in this traffic, probably like $8 to $12. Can you make it any faster? I can try. This is my last pickup. I've got like $30 on me. If you can do it in 5 minutes. Alright. While turning the wheel straight, he looks at me and is like, "You should probably put on a freaking seatbelt," then floors the gas. In Vegas once we asked our cab driver what was the shortest ride he had ever given. He said he drove a very elderly man from the front of Caesar's Palace to the back. The man had just gambled away his wedding ring and didn't want to walk through the casino in case he ran into his wife. Such a short story. So sad. I picked up a guy across town and take him to the airport, and just as we get there he pats his pockets and says, "Oh shit, my passport is on the kitchen table." He asks if I could get him home and back again before his flight. I say maybe. He says, "How about an extra $20 over the meter?" We made it before his plane left, but he never rode with me again. It's because he was on Malaysia flight 370. I was working as cabbie, Australia, and about 20 seconds after the front cab had pulled away, 2 guys got in and said, "Follow that cab." I pulled off, did so, and once we were into traffic asked why, and they said they had his wallet and he was flying out of the country that morning, so they wanted to get it to him immediately. I contemplated briefly how far it might be and if it was going to be a big fare. But my good nature got the better of me and I pulled out my phone and called my friend and college colleague who was driving the other cab and got him to pull over. We were both still in the same street and I had pretty much dicked over myself, since it was a slow night and I could expect at least an hour's wait to get to the front of the rank again. They tipped me $5 on a fare that was tariff plus about 20 cents, which was nice of them. The second time it happened, the single guy in my cab was getting me to tail a private car and I didn't like the feel of him, so I intentionally lost the target. He didn't tip me, but I didn't give much of a crap. I was just happy to have him out of my taxi. When I was in the Navy, one of our port calls was in the Philippines. We had a curfew to get back to the ship before they closed the brow at midnight, and we'd get in trouble for coming back late. We wouldn't be allowed off the ship the next 2 days we were in port, and we wouldn't be allowed overnight liberty for our next port call. We caught a cab, but it looked like we weren't going to make it back on time, so I offered our taxi driver $20 to get us there with at least 5 minutes to spate. He looked in the mirror, his eyes lit up, and narrowed just as quickly. Suddenly the 3 lanes of traffic had a fourth. He was weaving in and out of other cars, and you would have thought this guy was driving the Grand Prix. This was going from Makati to Manila, the capital, and traffic was pretty heavy even near midnight. I thought we were going to die, but we made it back on time, so he got $20. Afterward I found out that $20 is a pretty good sum of money in the Philippines, so hopefully it really helped him out. We had been hanging out at the Hard Rock Cafe in Makati, and our ship was picking us up near the Mall of Asia, so it wasn't really that far of a drive, but we completely lost track of time because we'd all been drinking. That driver earned his $20 as far as I'm concerned. That sounds entirely like driving Mumbai, except 3 lanes of traffic somehow have 7 lanes. But if you ever find yourself constipated in India, rare, just get in a car for 30 seconds. It'll fix you right up. Some friends and I took separate cabs and I jokingly stated we were looking to get there before the other people. Dude started driving in the fricking city bike lane. Nick, cab drivers don't frick around. I am not a taxi driver. However, I did have a legitimate reason to jump into a cab and yell at the driver, "Follow that cab." I was at a bachelor party in Chicago. We all met at Emily's or O'Toole's or one of the other 1,000 Irish bars to watch a pay-per-view boxing match and get hammered. Then we went to another spot. At the other spot we knew the bar manager and they were hooking us up with shot after shot. The groom was getting trashed. Super trashed. He ended up dancing with some girl and kind of making out with her on the dance floor. All of this would have been okay if it weren't for the fact that 2 of the groomsmen were brothers of the bride. They were not cool with watching their future brother-in-law make out with some Rondo bar chick, so they dong blocked him. One brother went up to her friends and had them remove the girl. The rest of us went up to our buddy and dragged him off of the dance floor. This pee off the groom big time. He's such a giant baby. Seriously, I don't even talk to this sucker anymore. This night isn't 100% why, but it certainly played a factor in removing him from my life. He was belligerent. Our group sorta tuned him out and continued playing beer pong in this bar. A little bit goes by and out of the corner of my eye I see him stumble out of the bar and out into the street. I was both the only one who noticed and the only one who seemed to care. When I pointed it out to the others they just shrugged and kept playing. I walked outside to get him just in time to see him hop into a cab and take off down the block. I jumped into another cab and screamed, "Follow that cab." I should have left that sucker go off on his own. What happens next was freaking ridiculous. This dude goes to another bar down on Rush Street, miles away from where we were. I catch up with him as he goes in and starts stealing other people's drinks off the bar when their backs are turned. Now his fiancée starts blowing up my phone and is screaming at me to return her future husband. I try to explain to her that I didn't run off with him, that I was the only one keeping an eye on him, but she wouldn't listen and somehow I was a butthole. I ended up getting into a bar fight with this guy and we got kicked out. Now we are miles from our hotel room and I didn't even know which hotel we were staying at since I met them all at the bar and this dude was too drunk to relay any useful information. Hours go by and finally one of my other friends finally catches up to us and we navigate our way back to the hotel, deposit the groom in the lobby and instead of staying, I hop an early train back home. Frick these guys. And that's the story of how I jumped into a cab and screamed, "Follow that cab." I really wish I hadn't. Think about how few people get to say "follow that cab" in their lifetime. You, my friend, have unwittingly experienced the bucket list item of millions. I used to be a taxi driver a few years ago in a smaller town in CA. One of the most popular things to do in this town was get pee drunk at one of the few bars in town, and I made decent money by getting drunk people home every night. One night in particular around last call I had picked up a group at a bar that was headed to an after party to continue their booze-filled adventure, with several cars following to the new spot. Once we get to the new party spot, an apartment complex of all places, and my passengers vacate, I notice a large crowd all converging quickly toward the entrance of the complex. Knowing some crap was about to go down, I made my way toward the entrance and positioned myself in a way I could see what was going on but could easily get out of there if I needed to. Apparently before I had picked up my fare there had been some words exchanged or some drama balls at the bar. A couple carloads of angry and offended bar goers had followed the convoy to the new party spot and intended to continue whatever happened at the bar. Fight breaks out. Some dudes getting punched while sitting in his truck. Had to be about 30 people getting involved. And for some reason everyone just jumped out of their cars and left them running with the doors open before engaging in all-out fistfights. During all this craziness I notice a dude run across the street and jump into somebody else's Infiniti G35 and this is where crap got unreal for me. The guy throws it in reverse and slams into 3 separate parked cars. I'm thinking frick he's going to hit me and quickly back out of the way, and he flips around with half the car hanging and starts to take off. Owner of the car starts running down the street after him and I'm like frick I have to chase this guy. So I flip around and try to catch up to him as safely as I could. He was pulled over right around the corner possibly reflecting on what had just happened, and I was immediately calling 911. During the call, he started driving again and I started following. Eventually he realized what I was doing and started driving recklessly in residential areas and I wasn't about to get hurt or have any further damage done, so I backed off. Not even a minute later police were swarming the area and they had him pulled over and in custody. So no I didn't have like a James Bond passenger jump in my taxi and tell me to follow that car, but I did have a crazy butt moment where I felt compelled to follow a car because I thought it was the right thing to do. Anytime people ask me if I've seen crazy crap as a taxi driver I tell them either this story or the one about the 4 girls and the strip club mix up. That night sucked. TLDR. Chased down a drunk guy that stole some dude's nice car during a fistfight after he hit 3 parked cars. Followed it to a house. Lady passenger told me to wait and proceeded to get out and intercept her husband who was going to his second family. He looked completely caught and guilty. She just stared daggers at him and got back in the taxi and told me to drive. Whereupon she told me WTF was going on and I gave her a free 30-minute ride home. No physical favors. There was a part of me that hoped to see my friend's story in here. I would love the driver's perspective. Oh well. My friend was on the bus heading home after a few drinks. When walking around he keeps his wallet in his back pocket, but it's uncomfortable when he sits so he takes it out and places it on the seat by his leg. His stop comes up and he gets off. The moment the bus closes its door and pulls away is when he realizes that he forgot his wallet. Surprise surprise. He hails a cab and explains his situation to the driver. Baddest driver takes off after the bus. Okay, I'm embellishing. The bus was only 2 stops up from where he got off. The driver pulls in front of the bus just as it was about to pull away. Friend runs in, asks if anyone has seen a wallet. Some guy sighs and takes it out of his jacket pocket. Victory. Friend paid the cabbie with all the cash he had, which was something upwards of 40 plus bucks. Not really the situation OP is describing, but back when I was driving a cab I witnessed a drive-by shooting from behind the shooter's Impala. I called the police and followed them at a distance, until police knew about where to start looking and closing the net so to speak. But I must have followed them for a good 10 minutes before I was told by the dispatcher that a cop had eyes on the car and it was cool to stop following them. Tell me more. I tried this once in Spain. In a drunken stupor I left my wallet in the cab I just got out of, hailed the next cab I saw driving my direction and told him follow that cab. Dude went 5 kilometers under the speed limit and allowed the cab to get away worried about police. I gave him the opportunity of a lifetime, and I never saw my wallet again. Lol, and you couldn't pay. I told my cab driver to follow a car on numerous occasions, mostly because half of my friends were in the other cab, but that's not the point. I've never gotten weird stares. It's not that weird to ask. People just assume it's like this. I have been a cab driver for a short while and never had anything similar to what you see in movies or TV. Here's as close as I've been, though. I have been that car that had to be followed. It was a call for a large group which obviously wouldn't fit into my one car, so dispatch called for 2 cars. I was the first to arrive, not yet knowing that I was going to be one of 2 cars. When I pulled up, the Pax explained to me that they needed one more car, and I called dispatch and they said another car was only a couple minutes away. So basically the cool kids of the group got into my car and we turned up the music while we waited for the other cab. When he showed up, they told me what area they were going but wanted suggestions for what bars or clubs to go to because they were visiting from out of town. The other driver was new and had no clue of how to get to our destination or what clubs were there, so they followed me. Very anticlimactic, I know, but that's as close as I can get while still being honest. Not a cab driver, but one time my girlfriend texted me she would be alone at home for an hour and a half, but I lived 10 kilometers away, and I didn't have a ride. Just then, Can pulls up and I ask for a ride. I tell the guy if he can make a 10-kilometer trip in under 10 minutes, I'd pay him 80% over and above the fare as a tip. Dude knew what was up and freaking floored it. Literally burned rubber. 6 minutes flat. Totally worth it. So this story was from my dad when he was in Paterson. He was around 20-30 in the 80s. Driving along, he sees a douchebag steal an old lady's purse, jump into his car, and speed off. Without a moment's hesitation, my father took off after him, speeding down Paterson streets. Cops finally noticed the two cars, and then started going after my father. My dad pointed in the direction of the other car, trying to signal the police, but it wasn't till they started turning that the cops noticed the other car as the thief dumped the purse out the car. The cop speeds past my dad. My dad starts catching up to the other car. The car is about to make it to the parkway. The cop speeds ahead right. My dad goes left, and they cut him off in a V shape before he gets off the exit. Cut to inside the precinct. My dad gives his story. Cops thank him, and the old woman comes in. She walks up to my dad, and as sweet as pie, asks him, "Why did you steal my purse?" All his thunder was gone after that. She was senile and even gave the cops a hard time. Hence, no good deed goes unpunished. I was in a San Francisco taxi about 30 years ago. The hills there are wild. We mentioned and sort of requested that he drive like the flight scenes in the old TV show, The Streets of San Francisco. He did. We screamed bloody murder in glee and fear, loving every minute of it. Obviously, he probably did not own his own taxi. We took an Uber ride home after a night at the bar. Pulling out of the parking lot, a car backed into our driver's car. Our driver said oh heck no and went to get out of the car to check damage and whatnot. Well, the other car, a Jeep, took off over the curb to get away. Our driver went in hot pursuit mode, and the four of us were along for the ride. We were on the phone with the police when the Jeep pulled into a parking lot of a out-of-business restaurant. As we went to chase behind the building, the Jeep hit a huge pothole and just kept on going. There was no way out car could make it, so our chase ended there. Cops showed up about 5 minutes later and took statements from all of us. They ended up catching the other driver, I guess, but it was a crazy event to be a part of. TLDR, Uber driver chased someone who hit us with us trapped in the car. One time a few of my friends and I were late for a concert. We got into a cab in Vancouver, asked the cab driver how fast he could get us to the venue and smiled and replied, "Depends how many people you want me to kill on the way there." It was the best taxi ride ever. He ripped it, blasted music, and let us drink in the cab. Yes, it was years ago. Styx was doing the Mr. Roboto tour at the city center in New York City. My friends and I were big fans, and after the concert we asked a cab driver to follow their limo. He agreed and we sat back to enjoy what we thought would be a wild ride. The limo drove right around the corner to the Russian tea room. It was the shortest ride in history. We did get autographs, so that was cool. Yes, it was during a driving lesson. I was spotted at a light, fully in my lane. When the light turned green, the guy next to me went past and knocked off my mirror. My instructor was an ex-cop and had me speed, roll down my window, and flag him down. Finally got him to stop. Another driver then stopped, gave me her card, and said she saw the whole thing. When I got home, the instructor said to my mom, "So, there was a little incident." This didn't happen to me, but a colleague. So he's in a queue at the central station as the second car. The first car just got a customer, and as that car leaves, out of nowhere 4 different people all get into his car at once. A handyman type fellow, a businessman, a painter, and a regular Joe. One of them tells him to follow the car that just left, the one that was in front of him in the queue. He follows the car, but the ride is dead silent, and he's starting to get worried that maybe it's not such a great idea to comply with these random people. Before he has thought it through, the car they're following stops after a short ride, and they ask him to stop a bit further back. As soon as he stops, all 4 of them just jump out and leave the cab empty, without having paid the fare. Before he has time to process what just happened, a woman gets in at the front passenger side and wants to pay for the ride. She also offers an apology and an explanation. They were all undercover cops. She showed her badge and told him that they had to keep surveillance on that person in the first cab. She paid and then quickly ran off. We never got to know more than that though. Drove cabs years ago in Brisbane, Australia. Had one sort of fare like this. I'm in the cab line at Roma Saint Station when a very attractive young woman hops into the cab in front of mine. Within seconds of her getting in, a young man opened the door to my cab and jumped in. He said, "This is going to sound really corny, but can you follow that cab?" He pointed at the cab in front, the one the young woman got into. Driving a cab can be pretty boring at times, especially when you're sitting at a rank for ages, so I agreed. We waited for the cab in front to pull out, and waited, and waited. The driver opens his door and gets out, moves around to the front of the cab and lifts the bonnet. The cab won't start. It looks terminal, so the woman gets out of the cab and comes back to ours. As it's the only other cab on the rank, she sticks her head in the window and asks if she can get a ride with us. I turn to the young man and ask if that's okay. Obviously he says yes. The young woman had to get to the airport. She had some business in Sydney apparently, so I headed that way while they sat in the back, making small talk. By the time we get to the airport, she's given the young man her phone number, dropped her off and asked the young man where he wants to go. He tells me back to Roma Saint. Apparently he was changing trains there on the way to work and spotted the young woman at the train station. So back we go. This guy has a grin on his face that was so big I was worried it would meet up at the back of his head. When we get back to Roma Saint, he offers to give me a tip, which I refuse. I told him the story alone was worth any tip he could give, and he seemed fine with that. We were heading to a ski camp in Las Linas, Argentina. We land in Buenos Aires in the AM and our bus doesn't leave until 8 at night. So during the whole day we have a guide showing us around Buenos Aires until we show up at the bus station to get going. The guide starts looking for the bus we are supposed to get on, and after asking a few questions to someone in charge, he starts to panic and tells us we missed it by like 10 minutes. I am not sure again why we got there late, but that's besides the point. And at this point the drive to Las Linas is something like 12 hours, so the guide is running around everywhere trying to figure out a ride for us. There is 4 of us including the guide. It's me, another skier, and the coach. You need to realize we have luggage to last us 3 weeks plus 2 pairs of skis, tuning kits, boots, helmets, all that stuff. The guide finds 2 beat up taxis. We fill both of them up and the plan is to catch the bus before it leaves the next station it's stopping at before going on its long trip. So I am sitting in the front passenger seat, have ski bags leaning on my right shoulder between the headrest and the window. In the back there's barely enough room for the other skier and the guide. The coach is in the other taxi with the rest of the luggage. We're flying through the streets of Buenos Aires while the guide and the driver are arguing about the price for the special drive. Meanwhile I am sitting there holding onto the handle on the roof thinking he'll give that butthole whatever price he wants if he doesn't kill us. I am not kidding when I tell you the car got air at some point. The road was slowly going downhill with roads going perpendicular through it, so it made for some perfect airtime. At one point we had to stop at a red light and his freaking car died. The taxi driver starts yelling in Spanish and calling his car a puto while turning the key and bashing on the dash. I was thinking, this is nuts, this car is crap, we're never going to make it. And then bam, out of nowhere just before the light turned green, car started. Wow, how. We eventually made it to the other station, the bus was there and we got on and made it to Las Linas. I have 2 stories, both in separate trips to Cuba. The first one happened when a group of guys, including me and my dad, were getting into taxis to get back to the hotel. As soon as we had boarded the taxis, my dad told the drivers that he would tip $50 US to whichever driver got to the hotel first. Now, $50 is a lot of money for a Cuban taxi driver, so needless to say they both started driving as fast as possible, swerving through traffic, running red lights and not stopping at intersections. We came close to crashing at full speed in an old 50s car with no seat belts at least 10 times, all for $50. Contrastingly, on another occasion, me and some friends were coming out of a nightclub and two of the guys got into a car with two girls and some guys driving. These old cars have those front seats where you can sit 3 people. We had to be back at the hotel in 30 minutes or we would lose our shuttle and consequently our flight back home. So I told them to get out of that random car because they didn't have time to go somewhere else. They wouldn't listen and the guys driving started to try and drive away, so I confronted the car and punched the hood to make them stop. Everyone got a bit scared and my friends got out of the car, but the Cubans got quite angry, so we rushed into a taxi and drove off. However, they started chasing us and when they caught up with us I pulled my arm out of the window and flipped them off. To this they responded by clubbing my arm with a metal tube and then speeding off. I told the taxi driver I would give him $100 if he followed and caught up with them, probably the stupidest idea of my life. Luckily the taxi was a reasonable man and said he wouldn't do it because that would get us all killed. Thanks to that we got back to the hotel safely and on time. Had a lot of crazy things when I was driving a cab. Craziest was when I had a fare steal his wife's purse for drug money unbeknownst to me, drive him from one motel to another to meet up with a couple he was hanging out with, then to a crack house to make a purchase. Leaving there my dispatch calls my cell and tells me he had stolen the person to take him back to the original motel so the cops could arrest him. Dispatch tells me to run red lights and stop for nothing until I get him back to be arrested. Of course if I had done that I would have been tied up forever and I wouldn't have gotten paid. I asked the guy if he wanted to go ahead and get arrested tonight or some other time. He chose some other time, so I told him to pay me what was on the meter and I would tell the cops he bolted when I got caught in traffic. I was in Calcutta several years ago with some friends of mine doing some volunteer work. We were heading back to our hotel and divided into 2 groups to get into rickshaws. 3 people per rickshaw. As the other group took off in front of us, we spontaneously told the driver to race the rickshaw that just took off. He had this devious grin that showed that he was up for the challenge. He absolutely floored it. He cut through traffic, ignored pedestrians, ran through traffic lights. At one stage he drove on the wrong side of the road in between 2 oncoming trucks just to overtake our friends. Needless to say that we won the race and we tipped him generously. TLDR. Indian rickshaw drivers take no prisoners. Not a real possibility of that happening, as the cab company I worked for frowned on picking up no calls, meaning if you call first you get a cab. And we didn't use meters, lol. But someone came to the actual cab stand and I was next in line and they said we had to catch so and so that just robbed him and a $100 tip was the incentive. We caught the guy. They fought. Cop pulled up behind me. I got a ticket for speeding. They both were arrested for fighting and I got stuck paying the fare because the guy got arrested. The cop was already going to get me for speeding. Getting them for fighting was a bonus, I guess. What was the total cost to me, you might be wondering? 3 points on my license, $300 between court cost and fine, $100 for driver ed course to remove points, $18.50 for the fare, $418.50. Ha. Funny what they say about the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. I'm reading Salmon of Doubt by Douglas Adams and just got to the bit where Dirk gently hails a cab and tells the driver to follow that cab. To which the cabbie goes on at length about how nobody ever says that and how surprised he is that someone actually said it to him. Well, I was driving this guy around a few days ago, and he said he wanted to go bowling. He was coughing and crap all over my cab. I asked if he wanted any help, but he said he was just going to Subway home. I don't know though, cause Subways in Nick are kind of busy. Funniest thing now, I am coughing too. Guess I got his flu or whatever it was. Not a driver, but a passenger. We were a large group, so we had to take 2 cabs. The first group got in the first cab and gave the address. I got in the second cab and jokingly said, "Follow that cab." I was going to give him the address so he could take us to our destination, but he took us seriously and just followed the other cab until it got to the hotel. I was a cab driver for many years. My policy was to not follow that car. There are all kinds of reasons why this is a bad idea. Mainly, I would ask them what the destination was and drive there directly. If the situation was such that there were no other options, I would ask them if for sure that the person in the other vehicle knows that they are being followed. The year I turned 20, a friend and I got jobs as taxi drivers in the Hamptons. It was an incredible and insane experience, and I've got a few stories I remember from that summer, including but not limited to offers to smoke crack, picking up millionaires from helipads, and rebuffing forceful advances from drunk and aggressive gay men. However, only one of which involved an actual car chase. The shifts were 5 p.m. 5 a.m. and us summer hires only worked Thursday, Friday and Saturday when everyone was out partying and spending money. After a few weeks they decide to let me take the cab home between shifts so I don't have to drive my rattletrap Honda back and forth to the east end of Long Island. Friday mid-afternoon I decide to get the taxi washed before heading out to start my night. I'm in some pretty heavy traffic cutting through town to the car wash. RT 25 in Center each if anyone cares, when the line of cars ahead of me stops suddenly. I screech to a halt and look into my rear view to see the woman behind. Panic flashed across her face. Try and swerve to the right. Unfortunately she isn't quite fast enough and clips my bumper and tail light. Okay, no big deal. We'll just pull over and do the insurance shuffle. But no, she takes off down the shoulder and we're off. She hooks into a parking lot, me following, honking, trying to get her to pull over. She's shouting and waving her arms. I notice the elderly woman in the passenger seat and little girl in the back when she pauses to pull back onto the road and into a residential neighborhood. Luckily for their sake, this wasn't a particularly high-speed chase. After a few twists and turns she pulls into a driveway and hustles everyone into the house, but I'm already on the phone with the police giving them the address. It's starting to get late at this point and I don't stick around long after giving the cops my statement. I do partly feel bad about it because I'm pretty sure she was running due to sketchy insurance or immigration status, but I sure as heck couldn't just bring in a smashed up cab without getting a police report. I got a few sideways looks when I showed up at the office to trade for a fresh cab and hand in the police report, but otherwise the rest of that night was pretty normal, at least in the context of that surreal summer. If this gets any interest I'll post more taxi stories. Not a taxi driver, but I once had one chase a bus for me. I was visiting my girlfriend at a remote part of Costa Rica, around 12 hours away from home. The only road to get there goes through a very mountainous region, so that's why it takes so long to get there despite Costa Rica being so small. So I planned on coming back home on the first bus Sunday morning, the only one that was not completely sold out anyway, because I had to work on Monday. According to my girlfriend there were two places where I could take the bus, the terminal and a stop at the outskirts of the town. She decided it would be nice to wait for the bus at the stop so we could spend a little longer together. So I said sure, why not? We were at the stop and for a moment she started kissing me and we got distracted, when all of a sudden, the bus passed by. She freaked out. I freaked out as well. She started walking towards the taxi stop nearby and I followed, not understanding what she is planning. She picked a cab and told me get the frick inside the car and then tells the driver he missed the bus. Follow it. The guy floored the gas and I fastened my seatbelt. Trust me, the ride was like being on a roller coaster with all the turns and hills. My heart was racing. We finally spot the bus after 20 very dangerous minutes, moment at which the cab driver started honking over and over again. The bus doesn't stop, so at the first straightish part of the road that we reached the taxi sped up, past the bus, and forced it to stop. The bus driver was like, dude, what the frick? You want to die? I paid and got off the taxi and showed the bus driver my ticket only to find out that, surprise, it was not the bus I was supposed to take. Mine had not passed yet, so I was left stranded for like 20 minutes in the middle of the jungle wondering what's gonna happen. Finally, my bus arrived. I got on, took a seat and proceeded to vomit my guts out. I threw up 3 times in the first hour of the ride. I had only one bag to collect it and somehow some of the vomit ended overflowing and falling on my pants. 10 hours later or so I was finally home. I freaking drive taxi in a small Canadian town for a living. I used to be on the night shift. Thursday, Saturday are our busiest nights. I've seen it all on night shift. We have several prominency and crack dealers in my small town. I'm the youngest cabbie in my town, 28, and so it's normal that they normally request me when they call into dispatch. I've had this guy throw his cell phones out of my cab when he sees police. He has given me $100 to hang out in a hotel parking lot where we saw some police. I dropped him off at the mall first, then went back to the hotel to see if the police were still there. They weren't and I got $100 for doing it, lol. And yeah, I've had that guy tell me to follow a car or stick to a very strict routine when driving. At times he would lay down in the backseat and tell me which direction to go. He could freaking tell where we were without sitting up and looking out the window. It was pretty fricked up actually. I'm back on days now. I asked too. The 5 PM to 5 AM was killing me. I can honestly say that the cash was better on nights and old people during the day wear me out. Like they literally drain me out. I hate carrying their stupid walkers and their stupid groceries. They don't tip. They often only need a cab for a block, which equals about 4.90 on the meter. The meter starts at 3.75. It's annoying as crap. One time in Mexico City, we were at one of my relatives' wedding. The night before we decided to go out for some tacos. It was around 10 PM and it was 8 of us. We hailed a taxi down and asked if he would take us to the Garibaldi Plaza. He looked at all of us and said, "If you think you can fit in the car, sure." His wife was sitting in the front seat. So we opened the doors and we all started to make our way into the car. 2 of my cousins are 5 minutes and 10 seconds and 6 feet. The rest of us are between 5 feet and 5 feet 8 inches. His wife moved into the middle of the front seats. I went in the front next to the lady and my cousin Paul, who was only 15 at the time and 5-0 rail thin, squished in next to me, sort of sitting on my lap. Half cheek on my lap and the other squished by the door panel. Now the back was a complete clusterfuck. Take into consideration that this car was a 1980s Dodge Dart. My sister, brother-in-law, and my cousin sat down. My other 2 tall cousins had to lay across them. Their feet actually ended dangling outside the window because we couldn't fit. It was the worst 20 minutes ride ever in a taxi. Setting: Saudi Arabia. Friends, expats of Middle Eastern and Pakistani descents. They hailed cabs, which were likely driven by a Pakistani, Bangladeshi, or an Indian. These workers are typically paid a fixed rate of $200 per month, and in Saudi Arabia it is unheard of to tip a taxi driver. So, my friends split up into 2 separate taxis and told each driver that they would tip him 20 reals if they arrived at the destination before the other taxi. Apparently the 2 drivers drove like madmen. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.